There's a moment in the African bush when everything stops, not because of silence, but because something fundamental has shifted. The hierarchy just cracked, the untouchable just became vulnerable, and somewhere out there a lion with nothing left to lose is remembering exactly who put him in this position. His name was Scar, not because he wanted it, because he earned it through 9 hours of pure brutality that nobody in the Serengeti should have survived. When it was finally over, when the dust settled and the attackers walked away, Scar wasn't running, he wasn't hunting, he was lying in the dirt bleeding out, watching his world collapse, listening to the roars of triumph from the coalition that had just torn everything he owned away from him. For 3 months, nobody thought he'd make it. Rangers who found him thought they were witnessing the aftermath. They thought they were watching a dead lion take his last breaths. But something inside Scar refused to quit, something primal, something angry, something that understood that this wasn't the end. This was just intermission. And when he came back, when he finally healed enough to walk without limping, when that fire in his eyes reignited, he didn't come back for territory. He didn't come back for prides or mating rights. He came back for revenge against every lion who had counted him out. This is how a broken king becomes a monster. This is how a lion chooses death over dishonor. To understand what happened on that day, you need to understand who Scar was before the battle. He wasn't born with everything. He wasn't raised in a pride that prepared him for greatness. He fought for every inch of territory he ever owned, and every scar on his body told a story of that struggle. Scar had ruled the eastern sector of the Serengeti for almost 6 years. He controlled 4 prides, maintained nearly 45 square kilometers of prime hunting ground, and had fathered more cubs than any other male in his generation. He wasn't the biggest lion anyone had ever seen. He wasn't the loudest roarer or the most aggressive fighter. What Scar had was something different. He had intelligence. He understood territory the way a general understands a battlefield. He knew where water sources would be during drought. He knew which pride females were about to come into estrus. He knew the migration patterns of wildebeest herds before they even moved. But most importantly, he knew how to be alone. Scar didn't have a coalition, no brothers to back him up, no allies to call when trouble came. For 6 years he had defended his territory as a solitary male, something that should have been impossible. Coalition males hunt better. Coalition males intimidate better. Coalition males have backup when fights get desperate. Scar had none of that. What he had instead was a reputation that made other males think twice before testing him. He had survived every challenge, every invasion, every moment when his territory should have been taken from him. He had proven something that few lions ever prove, that intelligence and strategy could overcome the advantage of numbers. But in the Serengeti, nothing stays the same. Nothing stays stable. And in early 2024, something shifted in the ecosystem that would change everything for Scar. A new coalition emerged from the north. Not just any coalition, the Kilimanjaro brothers. 5 males, all between 7 and 9 years old, all in their physical prime, all moving like they had something to prove. They had already dominated territory to the north, had already built a reputation that made other males nervous. Now they were looking south. Now they were looking at Scar's territory and seeing opportunity instead of danger. Scar knew they were coming before they arrived. The migrating wildebeest had already started moving strangely, avoiding certain paths. The buffalo herds were clustering in different areas. The birds were quieter. Every indicator he had learned to read over 6 years was telling him the same thing. Something major was approaching his territory. He increased his patrols, roared longer at night, scent-marked more aggressively. He was sending a message to whatever was coming. This land has a king, and he's not leaving. The Kilimanjaro brothers arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, all 5 of them crossing into his territory at once, walking through the savannah like they already owned it. They didn't sneak in, didn't test boundaries carefully. They walked straight through his scent marks, directly over his claims, announcing themselves to every animal within 20 kilometers that a new force had arrived. Scar was hunting when he caught the scent. A fresh kill, a young zebra he'd brought down near the river. He left the meat and began tracking them. Not running, not panicking, tracking them methodically, understanding their route, learning their patterns. He was already planning. The first confrontation happened that evening. Scar found the Kilimanjaro brothers near a waterhole, drinking, relaxed, not expecting a solitary male to challenge them on their first day in new territory. He roared from a distance, a deep, resonant call that echoed across the plain. All 5 males looked up simultaneously. Scar roared again, this time walking toward them, not charging, just walking, slow and deliberate, the way a lion walks when he's decided something needs to happen right now. The oldest Kilimanjaro male, a lion they called Bronze for the dark coloring across his mane, stood and roared back. The other 4 remained seated, watching. Scar continued walking until he was maybe 30 meters away, still in the open, still deliberate, still controlled. Bronze walked forward to meet him. The tension was unbearable. 2 apex predators, 2 competing visions of who owned this territory, facing off in the fading light. Rangers who were monitoring the area from a distance said the moment felt like watching dominoes about to fall, except nobody knew which direction they'd collapse. Bronze charged first. Not a full-power charge, just aggressive, testing, trying to see how Scar would react. Scar didn't back up. He met the charge head-on, and when they collided, the impact sent both males sprawling. For almost 3 minutes, they fought right there in the open. No technique, just raw power and fury. Scar was fast. He moved like electricity, striking from angles Bronze wasn't expecting. But Bronze was bigger, and he had 4 brothers watching, knowing that if he lost this one-on-one, they would have to step in to support him. The thought alone gave him extra strength. When they finally separated, both males were bleeding. Bronze had a deep gash across his shoulder. Scar's ear was torn, hanging at an angle that looked painful and wrong. Scar walked back to his side of the waterhole. Bronze walked back to his brothers. Neither had won decisively. Neither had surrendered. But the message had been sent. This male would fight, and he would fight hard. The Kilimanjaro brothers respected that. They established a camp about 3 kilometers away and began their own patrols, their own scent marking. For 2 weeks there was an uneasy coexistence. Scar held his eastern sector. The brothers held the western half of what used to be just Scar's territory. Prides were confused about who to listen to. Some stayed loyal to Scar. Others began recognizing the Kilimanjaro brothers' authority. The balance was shifting, but it hadn't collapsed yet. Then came the pregnant lioness. Her name was Zara, and she had been with Scar's pride for 3 years. She was carrying cubs, Scar's cubs, due in less than 2 weeks. She was also incredibly valuable, and the Kilimanjaro brothers knew it. A pregnant lioness meant future generations, meant genetic legacy, meant power. 3 of the brothers tracked her away from the main pride and cornered her near a kopje, a rocky outcropping in the middle of the savannah. They didn't attack her. They just blocked her exit, making it clear that she belonged to them now. When Scar heard what had happened, something shifted in his eyes. The controlled, strategic lion disappeared. What remained was pure rage. He tracked her the same day, moving with a speed and purpose that was terrifying to watch. He found her with the 3 brothers, and he attacked without hesitation, without calculation, without the strategy that had defined his entire existence. He just attacked, raw, desperate, furious. He drove one of the brothers off immediately, but the other 2 held their ground, and within minutes, Scar was fighting 2 males simultaneously while trying to protect a pregnant lioness who was also fighting. She escaped. Scar made sure of it, driving her back toward his territory, making it clear that she was under his protection. But the victory cost him. He was bleeding from 3 different wounds, was moving slower, was clearly hurt. The 2 brothers he had fought looked at each other, and a silent decision passed between them. They roared for their other brothers. Within minutes, all 5 Kilimanjaro brothers were circling Scar. He was still in the open, still bleeding, still recovering from the intensity of the previous fight. He could have run. He could have walked away and lived to fight another day. Instead, Scar did something that would define him forever. He stood his ground. He roared, and he charged directly at Bronze, the oldest brother, the one he had already fought once. It was either the bravest or the stupidest thing anyone who witnessed it had ever seen. What followed was 9 hours of combat that would become legend in the Serengeti, not because it was quick or decisive, but because it was so absolutely brutal that by the end, nobody could believe one lion had survived at all. The 5 brothers didn't fight fair. They didn't take turns or show honor or follow any rules except the rule that existed in that moment. Take down the intruder by any means necessary. Scar fought like a lion possessed. He separated Bronze from the group and mauled him so badly that Bronze had to back away, blood pouring from gashes across his entire body. But when Bronze retreated, the other 4 closed in. He caught one of them, a younger male they called Shadow, in a position where he could have ended the fight with one bite to the spine, but before he could finish, the other three had him surrounded again. The fight moved across the savannah. They fought in dust clouds where rangers could barely see what was happening. They fought in shallow water that turned red. They fought as the sun burned higher and hotter. Every few minutes, Scar would gain the upper hand, and every few minutes the numbers would overwhelm him again. He was slowing down. Rangers who were watching from a safe distance could see it. His movements were becoming less precise, his charges less powerful. Blood loss was mounting, dehydration was setting in, but he kept fighting. After 7 hours, Scar made a critical error. He overcommitted on a charge against two brothers coming from his left, and in doing so, he left his back exposed. The other three hit him simultaneously. One locked onto his hindquarters, another grabbed his spine, the third tore into his neck. Scar twisted with everything he had left, managed to disconnect from two of them, but the one on his spine held firm. He felt something break. Something critical shifted in his body. He lost control of his back legs. He was on the ground now, on his side, still fighting, still trying to stand, but his body wasn't responding the way it should. The five brothers moved in for the finish. This was the moment where Scar should have died. This was the moment where a lion, broken, paralyzed, defeated, should have simply accepted the end. But Scar did something that nobody expected. He roared, not a roar of pain or surrender, a roar of defiance, a roar that seemed to say, "I might die here, but I'm not dead yet." The roar startled them. It was so unexpected, so powerful despite everything, that all five brothers hesitated. It was just for a moment, maybe 2 seconds, but in those 2 seconds, Scar managed to flip himself onto his front, managed to get his front legs under him, and managed to stagger forward. He was broken, he was bleeding, he was operating on pure will alone, but he was moving. He dragged himself toward the nearest exit from the open savannah, toward thick bush that the brothers couldn't easily navigate as a group. And somehow, impossibly, he made it there. The five brothers followed, but only briefly. Scar disappeared into the darkness under the trees, and they did not pursue. Rangers found him the next morning. He was lying in a shaded area, barely breathing, barely conscious, covered in wounds that looked like they should have been fatal. They documented everything: the broken ribs, the spinal damage, the infected bite wounds, the torn muscle tissue. Multiple rangers independently said the same thing. They didn't expect him to see tomorrow. He should be dead. Nothing alive could survive injuries like this. But Scar did what he had always done. He survived. It took 3 weeks before he could walk without his back legs dragging. It took 5 weeks before he could hunt even the smallest prey. It took almost 3 months before he was back to anything approaching full function. And during all that time, the Kilimanjaro brothers ruled his territory. They took his prides. They mated with his females. They killed his cubs. They erased every trace of his 6-year dominance and replaced it with their own authority. Scar listened to all of it from the edges, recovering in silence, rebuilding his strength, and most importantly, building something else, a plan. Ragnars, who studied lion behavior, said later that what Scar did during recovery was almost unprecedented. Instead of accepting his new reality as a nomadic male, instead of moving on to find another territory or join another pride somewhere else, he essentially created a shadow existence. He stayed in his old territory, but operated in the margins. He hunted at night when the brothers were resting. He drank from water sources they weren't using. He maintained a presence without directly challenging them. He was learning their patterns, understanding their routines, and most importantly, he was healing. Every day his muscles got stronger. Every day he tested his legs to see how much they would support. Every day he got angrier. 3 months to the day after the battle, Scar left his hiding place. His body was still not perfect. The spinal damage had left him with a slight asymmetry in his back legs that would never completely go away. But he was functional, and more importantly, he was ready. He had identified something during his time in the shadows, something that nobody else had noticed. The Kilimanjaro brothers were not as unified as they appeared. The younger males were growing restless. The oldest, Bronze, was spending more time alone because of the wounds Scar had inflicted. The coalition was beginning to show cracks. On a night when Bronze was separated from the others, hunting alone near the southern boundary of what used to be Scar's territory, Scar made his move. He walked out of the darkness, and for the first time since the 9-hour battle, He stood face to face with the oldest Kilimanjaro brother. Bronze recognized him immediately. The shock on the lion's face was unmistakable. He looked like he was seeing a ghost. The lion he had fought for 9 hours, the lion he had defeated so thoroughly that he'd left him for dead, was somehow standing in front of him, breathing, moving, very much alive. Scar didn't roar. He didn't posture or try to appear larger. He just walked forward with a precision and purpose that Bronze recognized immediately as something dangerous. This wasn't desperation. This wasn't a lion trying to prove something. This was a lion with a specific objective and a willingness to die to accomplish it. Bronze tried to run. For the first time in any engagement with Scar, the oldest Kilimanjaro brother chose flight over fight. Scar chased him, and this time with only one opponent instead of 5. The outcome was never in doubt. Scar caught him before he reached his brothers, and what happened next was swift and brutal and final. Bronze didn't get back up. The other 4 Kilimanjaro brothers heard the roar and came running. They found Scar standing over Bronze's body, breathing hard, bleeding from fresh wounds. But standing, they looked at this lion that they had destroyed, this lion that should have been dead, and they saw something that terrified them. They saw a lion with nothing left to lose. They saw a lion who had already chosen death over surrender. They saw a lion who had come back from the worst kind of destruction because the alternative was unacceptable. They attacked together, all 4. But Scar was a different animal now. The recovery had done something to him mentally. The rage that had been building for 3 months had transformed from desperation into something cold and controlled. He moved like he had already seen this fight happen 1,000 times. He separated them. He drove wedges between their coordination. He was no longer fighting to win territory or to prove dominance. He was fighting to survive against impossible odds, and that's when lions become their most dangerous. The battle lasted almost 4 hours this time, but it was different. The earlier fight had been about strength. This one was about strategy and will. Scar took wounds, serious ones, but he also gave them worse. He caught one of the younger brothers in a vice-like grip and held on despite their desperate attempts to escape. When the brother finally got free, his mane was torn in half, hanging like a grotesque flag. Another suffered a deep wound across his face that would leave him partially blind in one eye for the rest of his life. By the time the brothers finally retreated, by the time they finally accepted that they had made a mistake letting Scar survive, they were broken and demoralized in a way that defeat hadn't made them before. They had won once. They had had every advantage, but they couldn't win twice, and that knowledge changed everything. Within days, the Kilimanjaro brothers began leaving Scar's territory, not all at once, not as a unified retreat, but one by one, as if staying was too painful, too dangerous, too much of a reminder of the one fight they should have finished but didn't. The younger males were the first to go. Then Shadow, the one Scar had nearly finished in the original fight. Finally, even Bronze's replacement, the one who had taken leadership after Bronze fell, accepted that holding this territory was not worth the cost of maintaining it against a lion who would not stay dead. The Kilimanjaro brothers moved west, toward new territory, toward easier challenges, toward anywhere that wasn't Scar's domain. Scar reclaimed his territory, not with a conquest, but with a reclamation. Slowly at first, cautiously, making sure the brothers were really gone before he fully established himself again. The prides that had scattered recognized his roar and began coming back. The females that had been absorbed into the Kilimanjaro coalition separated themselves and returned to their old families. The cubs that had survived looked at this scarred, damaged, half-broken lion and somehow understood that their protector had returned. What happened next is what separates the story from being just another tale of dominance and defeat. Scar didn't take revenge on the prides or the females for accepting the Kilimanjaro brothers. He didn't punish them for not waiting for him. He simply welcomed them back and began the work of rebuilding what had been destroyed. He established new patrols. He reinforced his boundaries. He fathered new cubs with the females that had carried his genetic legacy before the invasion. He was creating something new out of the ashes of what the brothers had tried to destroy. But something had changed in Scar. Rangers and researchers who monitored him said he was different, less patient, more aggressive during hunts, quicker to challenge any intrusion. The 9-hour battle had marked him, not just physically but mentally. He had touched the edge of death and come back, and that experience had transformed his entire approach to existence. He was still strategic, still intelligent, but now there was an edge to him, a reminder that under all the planning and intelligence, there was a lion willing to fight 5 opponents alone rather than accept dishonor. The story of Scar's revenge became something that spread through the Serengeti ecosystem. Young males learned about it. Established lions thought about it when they considered their next territorial expansion. The narrative shifted from being about a lion who had been conquered to being about a lion who had refused to accept conquest, who had rebuilt himself literally from being left for dead, and who had returned stronger and more dangerous than before. 6 months after Scar reclaimed his territory, another coalition tried to move in from a different direction. They had heard the stories but didn't believe them, figured that Scar was still weakened, still vulnerable, still operating below peak capacity. What happened when they tested him was something that took less than an hour. Scar dispatched them with a precision that suggested he had been waiting for another opportunity, had been preparing for the moment when someone else would doubt him. He drove them out of his territory with such ferocity that they didn't stop running until they were completely out of the Serengeti. The message was clear. Scar wasn't just defending territory anymore. He was defending his legend. He had been written off, counted out, left for dead, and he had come back. And anyone who challenged him now wasn't just fighting a lion. They were fighting against the entire narrative of a creature that refused to be broken. 2 years after the original battle, Scar was still ruling his territory, still defending his prides, still fathering cubs. But the spinal damage never fully healed. He would never again be the perfectly coordinated athlete he had been before the 9-hour battle. He walked with a slight drag in his back leg. He moved with a precision that suggested pain was always present. But he also carried himself differently, like a lion who had survived something that should have killed him, and therefore had nothing left to fear. The Kilimanjaro brothers eventually established themselves in a territory about 50 kilometers away. They didn't challenge Scar again. Some prides in the area said it was because they respected him. Others said it was because they feared him. The truth was probably somewhere in between. Scar had demonstrated something that few lions ever truly prove, that will and determination and the refusal to accept defeat could overcome even overwhelming odds, even physical destruction, even the weight of being left for dead. And somewhere in that scarred, limping, still dangerous lion was a reminder that in the African bush, the ones who survive are not always the strongest. Sometimes they are simply the ones who get angry enough, desperate enough, motivated enough to come back when everyone else thinks they're gone. Sometimes they are the ones who transform pain into purpose, who use every wound as fuel, who understand that giving up is the only true death. Scar lived his remaining years ruling territory that he had won twice, first through strategy and intelligence, then through sheer will and refusal to surrender. His story passed into legend, whispered around campfires, told by guides to tourists, remembered by lions who learned from his example that the fight isn't always decided on the first day. Sometimes the fight is decided by who still has something to prove when everything else has been taken away.